Hey, so now we're going to take a few minutes to take a close look inside of the nervous system. We're going to see how the nervous system triggers movement all around the body, how it interacts with the digestive system, and other systems all around the body to make things happen. All right, so let's get started. The general functions of the nervous system include sensory detection, information processing, and behavior. And the functional cellular unit of the nervous system is, of course, neurons. You can see in the picture that neurons are composed of what you're familiar with from other cells, the nucleus. Then there's the cell body, which has an irregular shape as compared to other cells. Dendrites, which protrude from the cellular body. And then we have the axon, which extends down to another axon terminal at the end. And then, in addition to that, we have the myelin sheath, which wraps the axon and increases conduction. There's the Schwann shell, which is on the myelin sheath, and then the node of Radavir, which is between each myelin sheath. The nervous system is divided into two groups. The PNS, which is the peripheral nervous system, which includes sensory, motor, and autonomic neurons, and the CNS, which is the central nervous system, which includes the spinal cord and the brain. Information and signaling is conducted along axons by nerve impulses, whose conduction velocity depends on the presence or absence of the myelin sheaths and the diameter of the axon. The largest myelinated axons have the fastest conduction velocities. In a minute, we're going to take a look at the sciatic nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body in the back of your leg. And it has, in nerve sense, it has a huge diameter, and it's known to have a tremendous velocity as far as conducting signals. Nerve information is transmitted from neuron to neuron or from neuron to effector organ by means of synaptic transmission. A lot of the naming of these neurons as well is related to what they innervate, and we'll see that as we go. So if you take a look at the picture, starting from the top, we have the brain, which is the largest mass of the nervous system, and then directly beneath it, connected to the brain, is the cerebellum, the spinal cord, which runs all the way down the posterior side of the back. And then you have a few of the major nerves shown here. There are many more, but these are the major ones. I'll just point out, like we mentioned earlier, down in the leg, you can see the sciatic nerve there, which transmits information to the major parts of the leg. And then the other one I'll point out is the brachial plexus. If you look in the shoulder area, another set of very important nerves there, the brachial plexus, which controls a lot of the arm movement. You see that a lot of the distal nerves are coming off of the brachial plexus. And so this would be a good time to also mention that some nerves can be classified as being afferent or sensory. They transmit sensory information from receptors in the central nervous system. And there are also some efferent or motor pathways which transmit motor commands from the central nervous system to muscles and glands and things. The nerves can also be classified as somatic or conscious perception and voluntary motor responses, or autonomic, which is responsible for involuntary control of the body. You can think about the digestive system or other components of your body that act without you having to think about it or to give it commands. And they usually do this to maintain our homeostasis or to go on living. All right. So let's take a detailed look at a nerve cell, so I can prove to you that it is in fact a cell and how it's composed and how it's different from other cells such as muscle cells or regular cells as we saw earlier. Okay, so if you look in the picture, let's start in the nucleus. You'll see that the nucleus, we should be familiar with that. That's in the center of the axon, and you can see the mitochondria are there. All the typical things you would want to see: the ribosomes, the rough ER, the smooth ER. All those things are inside of the axon head, making it a cell. And so we can see the shape of the axon is very different from other cells. It's kind of a web or a spiky thing going on here. And then we have the dendrites that extend from the axon. And this picture I like because it also shows the synapses from other nerve cells that attach to this particular axon. And you can see that in the axon head. You can also see that on the far end where the axon terminal is. You can see another nerve cell is connected there. And then more detail, you can see the myelin sheath is there, and this also shows how the axon runs through the myelin sheaths all the way down to the axonal terminal. And you see the nodes of Raynaud's, those gaps in between the myelin sheaths are very important. And as we mentioned earlier, the myelin sheath increases the conductivity of the axon, making the velocity of the voltage potentials to move much more rapidly. And if you see in the lower right, there's a cutaway of the myelin sheath on top of the axon. And you see the axon is inside. You see the nucleus of the Schwann cell. And these help the action potentials to move down all the way. And then last, in the top portion, the top circle, you'll see how one nerve connects with another. You see the synapse, you see the receptors on the accepting cell, and then you'll see neurotransmitters that are passing from one nerve to another. And let's take a closer look at that. There, take a look at that. So we have one a nerve connecting with another, and they're connecting through neurotransmitters. You can see that when one nerve wants to communicate with another, there's a little bit of exocytosis that goes on here similarly, and you see the neurotransmitters coming out, and they are reaching the receptors on the other neuron, and that's how they communicate with each other. Okay, so now let's talk about where all the nerves descend from, the brain and the spinal cord. So to begin, we're going to talk about matter. So the brain has white matter that is deep into the brain and gray matter that is superficial. And the inverse is true in the spinal cord. The white matter is superficial and the gray matter is deep. And the reason this is important for this discussion is that gray matter consists of unmyelinated axons, the slower axons, while as white matter consists of myelinated axons. You remember the faster axons, the ones that have the sheath. The brain and the spinal cord are also wrapped in a layer of meninges or a protective membrane. The outermost of this membrane, it's a three-layer system, but the outermost is referred to as the dura. So we have the dura that wraps the brain, wraps the spinal cord, and it keeps the cerebral spinal fluid inside of that sac so that it can flow around the brain and the spinal cord. So if you take a look at the picture, you'll see that there are 12 cranial nerves that descend from the brain. And correspondingly, there are 31 spinal nerves which descend from the spinal column. And you remember earlier we talked about the brachial plexus. which is the plexus in the arm, and we also talked about the sciatic nerve that you'll find in your leg. And if you look at the earlier picture, you can see how both of these groups of spinal nerves or descend from the spinal cord, and also if you follow them all the way up, you'll see that they descend from the brain. So in the picture, just quickly, you can see, let's go over some of the cranial nerves just to get a sense. So we can see the green is the optic nerve, and then we see the trigeminal, we see the facial nerve, the vagus nerve, the ocular motor. And so I like this picture because it's color coded, so you can see the separation between all of them. But let's look at a more clinical picture. Okay, so here we have, you can see the optic nerve. I want to point out the optic nerve and the ocular motor nerve. All right, so the ocular motor is something that we control, right? We can control where we want to look. We can move our eye left to right, up and down. But the optic nerve is sensory. We don't have to think about seeing something or looking at something, right? It just happens. It's a sensory nerve. Whereas the ocular motor nerve is one that we control. We tell our eye where we want it to move. And some of the other nerves you can see, they are well mapped. The trigeminal, for example, controls the sensory of the face, sinuses, and teeth. It has motor functions with the muscles of mastication or chewing. Then you have the facial motor, the muscles of the face. Over on the right side, you have the vagus motor, which is the heart, lungs, brachial, gastrointestinal, and the sensory functions, the heart, lungs, bronchi, trachea, larynx, all these things that you don't have to think about, those sensory functions that just happen from the vagus nerve. And last, let's look at a cutaway of the spinal cord. So you see in our picture, if you look in the upper left, you'll see the bony part of the spinal column, a vertebral section, and you see there's a space in the middle where that rectangle is, and that is where the spinal cord resides. All right, so if we look at the closer picture, you'll see a butterfly shape of the gray matter inside of the spinal cord, and then surrounding it is the white matter, which gives it that oval shape, right? And you can even orientate yourself based on this gray matter butterfly. You can find the anterior gray horn, which will tell you the front of the organism, and the posterior gray horn, which will tell you the back, towards the back of the organism, and that'll allow you to find the dorsal root of a nerve. And if you find the anterior gray horn, you'll be able to find the ventral root of a nerve.